I was standing in line at the bank when my phone vibrated in my hand. I almost ignored it. Banks had become places of waiting for me. Quiet rooms where people stared at screens and numbers while pretending not to notice one another. Since my husband died, I had learned how to wait without expecting anything in return. But when I saw the name on the screen, something old and tender stirred in my chest. Michael, my son. I answered the phone the way mothers do when they still believe love protects them. My voice softened automatically, shaped by decades of habit. I called him sweetheart, the same word I used when he was small and afraid of the dark. When he used to crawl into our bed in the middle of the night and whisper that he'd had a bad dream. There was silence on the other end, not the kind caused by bad reception. This silence was intentional, measured, the kind people use when they are bracing themselves to do something they know is wrong. When he finally spoke, the warmth I expected never came. His voice sounded clipped, distant, as if he were reading instructions rather than speaking to his mother. He asked me not to interrupt. That alone felt strange. Mothers interrupt by instinct. We warn. We advise. We worry out loud. But something in his tone told me that interrupting would only make things worse. So I stayed quiet. Then he told me my house had been transferred. He said it casually, as if he were talking about switching internet providers. He said the paperwork had gone through that very morning. He said he and his wife needed capital for a business opportunity that couldn't wait. He said I didn't need a house that big anymore. He said he had already found me a room near the bus station. Temporary, he added, as if that word could soften what he was doing. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard him. The bank teller called my number. Someone behind me cleared their throat impatiently. The world continued moving forward while I stood completely still, trying to understand how a sentence like that could exist. I asked him what he meant. He repeated himself, faster this time, the way people do when they want to end a conversation before questions appear. He said everything was taken care of. He said someone would come help me pack the next day. He said he had a meeting and would call me later. Then the line went dead. I stood there staring at my reflection in the glass partition in front of the teller's desk. My face looked older than it had that morning. 68 years old, widow, mother, and in the span of one phone call, I had become an inconvenience that needed to be relocated. I didn't cry. That surprised me more than anything else. Instead, a heavy calm settled in my chest, the kind of stillness that comes when something fundamental shifts. It felt like the moment just before a storm breaks, when the air becomes strangely quiet and everything seems to pause. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was married for 46 years to a man named Thomas. He believed in preparation. He believed in planning for storms even when the sky was clear. He used to say that love was built on trust, but wisdom was built on insurance. At the time, I laughed and told him he worried too much, standing there in the bank. I finally understood what he meant. Thomas had died 9 months earlier, quietly, in his sleep. No warning, no long illness, no chance to say goodbye. The night before he died, we had washed the dishes together like we always did. He rinsed, I dried. We talked about nothing important. He kissed my cheek and told me to remind him to call the lawyer the next day. Tomorrow never came for him. After the funeral, Michael changed, at least. That's what I thought at the time. He visited more often than he ever had before. He brought groceries I hadn't asked for. He fixed things around the house that weren't broken. His wife smiled politely, hugged me just a little too tightly. I told myself it was grief bringing us closer. I wanted to believe that. Now, standing in the bank with my phone still warm in my hand, I realized I had mistaken attention for care. I left the bank without finishing my transaction. I walked home slowly, as if my body needed time to catch up with what my mind had just learned. I noticed details I had ignored for years. The cracked sidewalk near the corner, the neighbor's new car parked crookedly in their driveway, the maple tree leaning slightly toward my porch, its leaves brushing the railing when the wind blew. My porch, I corrected myself. At least for now. Inside, the house smelled the same as it always had. Lemon cleaner, old books, faint traces of the life Thomas and I had built together. I set my purse down and made tea, my hands steady despite everything. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me where Thomas used to sit with the newspaper spread out in front of him. That was when I remembered the metal box. 3 weeks before Thomas died, he had handed it to me without much explanation. A small, unremarkable box. He told me to put it somewhere safe. He told me not to open it unless I truly needed to. I had placed it at the back of my wardrobe and forgotten about it until that moment. I retrieved the box and set it on the table. The key turned with a soft click. Inside were neatly organized documents and a folded letter in Thomas's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. He wrote that if I was reading this, something had gone wrong. He wrote that he hoped he was mistaken about needing these papers. He wrote that loving a child did not mean surrendering your life to them. His words were calm, practical, and painfully thoughtful. The documents were not dramatic. No secret fortune, no hidden empire, just careful planning, trusts, clauses, protections. One clause stood out more than the others: any property transferred without my direct, notarized consent was legally reversible, including the house. I sat there for a long time, the letter pressed to my chest, and for the first time since Michael's phone call, I cried, not from fear. Not from betrayal, from relief. My son believed he had taken everything from me. He had no idea how carefully his father had protected me. That evening, Michael texted me to confirm that the movers would arrive in the morning. He added that he would cover my first month's rent, as if generosity could erase what he had done. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I thanked him. I told him I trusted his judgment. It wasn't a lie. I trusted that his judgment would show me exactly who he had become. The next morning, instead of packing, I put on my coat and walked to a small law office 3 blocks away. The sign was faded. The waiting room smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee. I explained everything slowly and placed the metal box on the attorney's desk. He didn't interrupt. When he finished reading, he looked up at me and nodded once. By the time I walked back home, the process had already begun. I opened the front door of the house my son thought he owned and stepped inside with a calm I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Thomas died, I understood something clearly. Silence had protected them. Now it was going to protect me. The days after that call did not pass like normal days. They stretched, heavy and slow, as if time itself had decided to sit beside me and watch what I would do next. Every morning I woke up before the alarm, my eyes opening to the same ceiling I had stared at for decades, yet everything felt unfamiliar now. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not peaceful, empty. I moved through my routine on autopilot. Coffee, toast. The small radio by the sink murmuring voices I wasn't listening to. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, neighbors walked their dogs. Somewhere, children laughed. It felt almost offensive how normal everything looked when my entire understanding of my own life had cracked open. I kept replaying my son's voice in my head. Calm, controlled, efficient, as if he were canceling a subscription, not erasing his mother's place in his life. The words themselves were simple, but the tone was what hurt the most. No hesitation, no apology, just finality. By the third day, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't crying anymore. That scared me more than the tears ever had. I sat at the dining table, staring at the same envelope I had taken out and put back into the drawer countless times. The box sat beside it, untouched. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't know why. Maybe I was afraid that whatever was inside would make things real. Or maybe I was afraid it wouldn't change anything at all. I picked it up and placed it in front of me. The cardboard was worn at the corners, as if it had been handled many times before finally being hidden away. My husband had always been careful with his things, intentional. If he had left this behind, it meant something. I opened the box slowly. Inside were papers, neatly stacked. Old documents, photographs, letters tied together with a faded ribbon. At first glance, it looked like nothing special, just remnants of a long life. But as I began to sift through them, my hands started to tremble. There were copies of deeds, bank statements, names of accounts I had never seen before, properties I did not recognize, numbers that made no sense to me at first because my mind refused to believe them. I read the same lines again and again, convinced I was misunderstanding. And then I found the letter. My name was written on the envelope in his handwriting. The sight of it alone made my throat tighten. I sat back in the chair and held it there for a long moment, as if delaying the inevitable. Finally, I opened it. The words were simple, honest. Him. He wrote about love, about time, about the things we never say out loud because we assume there will always be another day. He wrote about our child, about his worries, about patterns he had noticed long before I had. He didn't accuse. He didn't condemn. He simply observed. And then he explained everything. The investments, the companies, the quiet decisions he had made over decades. The reason he never told me, the reason he never told our son. He wrote that he wanted me protected, no matter what happened. That he wanted me to have choices, even if everyone else believed I had none. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking openly, not from grief this time, from clarity. I wasn't powerless. The realization didn't bring immediate relief. It brought something heavier. Responsibility. Because now I had to decide who I was going to be in this story. The abandoned mother everyone assumed I was, or the woman who finally understood the full truth of her own life. The phone rang later that afternoon. I watched it for a full 3 rings. Before answering, it was my son. His voice was different now. Not cold, not warm, nervous. He asked how I was doing. He said things were complicated. He said money was tighter than expected. He mentioned legal issues, delays, unexpected costs. He spoke quickly, as if afraid I might interrupt. I didn't. I listened, and with every word, I understood more. The decisions he had made weren't just cruel. They were reckless. He had assumed I had nothing. That assumption had guided everything. He asked if I needed anything. The question sounded rehearsed, a checkbox, an obligation. I told him I was fine. That seemed to confuse him. Over the next few days, the calls became more frequent, shorter, more tense. He began asking questions without realizing he was asking them. Did I still live in the house? Had anyone contacted me about paperwork? Had I spoken to a liar? Each time, I answered calmly, simply no. What he didn't know was that I had already made my first call. The lawyer listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he said something that stayed with me. You're not reacting emotionally. You're reacting strategically. I didn't correct him. Maybe it was both. The process began quietly. No dramatic confrontations. No threats. Just documents moving from one desk to another. Signatures. Verifications. Corrections of assumptions that should never have been made. Meanwhile, my son's life was unraveling faster than he expected. The investment he had rushed into wasn't performing. The partners he trusted were suddenly distant. The money he thought would last was bleeding out in ways he hadn't anticipated. And the property he believed was safely his was now under review. He didn't know why yet. He just knew something was wrong. The first crack appeared when he received a letter he didn't understand. He called me immediately, panic leaking through his voice. I told him I didn't know anything about it. That wasn't a lie. I didn't know anything about it yet. I knew everything. Days later, he showed up at my door. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. He stood there awkwardly, as if unsure whether he was welcome. I stepped aside and let him in. The house felt different with him inside, like it was holding its breath. He sat at the table where he used to do his homework as a child, the same table where I had taught him to write his name, the same table where he now realized he might have nowhere else to go. He apologized. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't deep. But it was real. He said he hadn't meant for things to go this far. He said he thought he was doing what was best. He said fear made him act fast. He said he assumed I would understand. I nodded. Understanding didn't mean agreement. He asked if he could stay for a while, just until things settled, just until he figured things out. I told him yes, not because he deserved it, but because the story wasn't finished yet. That night, as he slept in his old room, I sat alone with the box again. I reread the letter. I looked at the documents. I thought about the woman I had been my entire life, the one who smoothed things over, the one who sacrificed quietly, the one who believed love meant endurance. And I thought about the woman I was becoming. This wasn't revenge. This was balance. And by the time my son woke up the next morning, the ground beneath his assumptions had already shifted. He just didn't know it yet. The morning light entered the house slowly, touching the walls as if it were seeing them for the first time. I was already awake. Sleep had become lighter these days, not because of worry, but because my mind was finally active again. Not circling, fear, not replaying old arguments, thinking forward. I could hear my son moving in his old room, drawers opening, the familiar creak of the floorboard near the bed. Sounds that once meant comfort now carried a strange weight. Memory and consequence living in the same space. I made coffee and sat at the table. I didn't rush. I didn't prepare myself for a confrontation. I didn't need to. What needed to be done would unfold on its own. He came into the kitchen looking unsure, like a guest who had overstayed but didn't know how to leave. He asked if I'd slept well. I said yes. He poured himself coffee without asking, then stopped halfway, as if remembering something. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. I don't understand how everything went wrong so fast, he said. It feels like the ground just disappeared. I stirred my coffee slowly. The ground doesn't disappear, I replied. It reveals itself. He frowned, not fully understanding, but listening. He started talking about his problems again. The partners who wouldn't return calls, the payments that were overdue, the contracts he hadn't read carefully enough. He spoke like someone confessing to mistakes he could no longer hide from himself. I let him talk. When he finished, his shoulders sagged. That house, he said quietly, I thought it was mine. I built my plans around it. I looked at him then. Really looked. Not as my child. Not as the boy I once carried. As a grown man facing the consequences of assumptions. You didn't think, I said calmly. You assumed the difference mattered. I stood up and walked to the cabinet where the box now lived openly, no longer hidden. I placed it on the table between us. His eyes fixed on it immediately. What's that? He asked. Your father, I said. That alone made him straighten. I opened the box and took out the documents one by one. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I explained the investments, the accounts, the properties held quietly in my name. The long-term planning that had nothing to do with secrecy and everything to do with protection. His face changed as he listened. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something like fear. You knew about this? He asked. I know about it now, I said, and that's enough. He ran a hand through his hair. So the house is mine, I said gently. It always was. The words didn't sound angry. They sounded factual. That was what made them land. He looked down at the table. I could see the math happening behind his eyes, recalculating a life built on a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said finally. I know, I replied, and I meant it. But intention doesn't erase impact. He nodded slowly. We talked for hours that day. Not arguing, not defending, talking about his fears, his impatience, the pressure he felt to prove himself, how quickly fear had turned into control. I told him about silence, about what it costs, about how love doesn't mean shrinking. He listened in a way he never had before. In the days that followed, things changed, not dramatically, but fundamentally. He found temporary work. He began making calls with humility instead of entitlement. He stopped assuming the world owed him stability, and I stopped rescuing. That was the hardest part. When he struggled, I didn't rush to fix it. When he panicked, I didn't soften the truth. I stayed present without surrendering myself. Slowly, he adjusted. Weeks passed. One evening, he came home later than usual. He sat across from me at the table and said something I never expected to. Here, I think I need to leave, he said, not because I don't appreciate you, because I need to learn who I am without leaning on you. My chest tightened, but not with pain. With pride. We made a plan. Not rushed, not emotional, practical, timelines, boundaries, expectations. The day he moved out, we hugged. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. After he left, the house felt quiet again, but different from before. This quiet didn't erase me. It held me. I began doing things I had postponed for years. I repainted the spare room. I joined a local walking group. I reconnected with friends I had slowly disappeared from while being needed at home. People noticed the change. They said I looked lighter. I felt clearer. Months later, my son visited. He knocked before entering. That mattered. We talked over tea. He told me about his work, his mistakes, his progress. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for space. He asked for advice. And this time, it was different. I gave it freely. That night, after he left, I sat alone and thought about the life I thought I knew. The role I believed I was meant to play. The box of assumptions I had lived inside for decades. I realized something important. The box had never been locked. I had just never tried to open it. I placed the documents back where they belonged, not as secrets, but as reminders, not of wealth, of agency. The television played softly in the background. I chose the channel. I chose the volume. No one turned it off. And for the first time in a long time, the silence that followed wasn't something I endured. It was something I chose. And that made all the difference.